The buzz surrounding the Royal Hotel was undeniable. Word of Pedro's vision and achievements had spread among luxury brands, and more stores began reaching out to inquire if additional spaces were available. The once quiet, unused corners of the hotel were transforming into a beacon of elegance and exclusivity. Meanwhile, construction on the state-of-the-art event space Pedro envisioned for weddings, parties, and conventions was progressing rapidly, a testament to his dedication to innovation. Yet, amidst the hotel's flourishing progress, Pedro's personal life remained in turmoil. 2 weeks had passed since he last saw Fernanda. Each morning and afternoon, he ordered his meals from a nearby restaurant, deliberately avoiding the VIP restaurant to shield himself from seeing her. Fernanda, on the other hand, grew restless. Concerned that Pedro was upset with her, she tried, in vain, to catch a glimpse of him. But Pedro had thrown himself into his work, burying his emotions beneath contracts, negotiations, and endless phone calls. Marcia, however, was far from blind to the changes happening at the Royal Hotel. The more success Pedro brought, the more she felt her grip on the presidential position slipping through her fingers. Desperation brewed beneath her composed exterior. Though she couldn't deny Pedro's contributions, she used every opportunity to belittle him, targeting his insecurities with razor-sharp precision. Despite his progress and vision, Pedro had a vulnerable side, one that Marcia knew how to exploit. Her calculated remarks chipped away at his confidence, feeding into the doubts that lingered in his mind. But Pedro, though wounded, began to feel the flicker of resolve grow stronger within him. One day, Marcia decided to escalate her tactics. She entered Pedro's office uninvited, holding something small and familiar in her hand, his father's ring. It was the only keepsake Pedro had of the man who had disappeared from his life. It symbolized the love and warmth he once knew, a fragile connection to a past that still haunted him. Marcia dangled the ring in front of him, her expression dripping with disdain. "Why do you keep this rubbish?" she sneered. "Throw it in the trash. It's as worthless as your father and as worthless as you." Pedro's breath caught for a moment, a mixture of anger and pain flashing across his face. Standing, he snatched the ring from her hand and clenched it tightly. "I don't want to fight you for the presidency, Marcia," he said, his voice low but steady. "But you're making me want to fight for it. And let me make one thing clear, I'm not afraid of you." Marcia's smirk faltered, her mask of confidence slipping just enough to reveal the fear beneath. She knew Pedro's determination was growing, and with every success he brought to the hotel, her power seemed to diminish. But she refused to back down, even as the tide turned against her. While Marcia plotted her next move, Pedro returned to his work with renewed purpose. Selena, observing her children from the sidelines, remained proud of Pedro's achievements but hadn't yet revealed her decision about who would lead the Royal Hotel. In the beginning, Pedro suspected Marcia of stealing from the company, her desperation leading him to think she was hiding something illicit. But after combing through the hotel's financial records with meticulous care, he reached a different conclusion. Marcia wasn't stealing, she was consumed by ambition. She didn't simply want control of the Royal Hotel, she wanted to own it completely, to shape it into her empire. Pedro realized that Marcia's fear wasn't rooted in her dislike of him but in her fear of losing the one thing that defined her identity: power. As Pedro parked his car in the lot outside the Royal Hotel, he noticed Fernanda standing nearby, waiting for him. The sight of her took him by surprise. He stepped out of the car, his expression cautious. "Hi, Pedro," Fernanda said, her tone hesitant but firm. "Do you have a minute to talk to me?" Pedro paused, unsure how to respond. "Hi, Fernanda." "Sure. Is everything okay?" Her eyes searched his face. "Why are you avoiding me?" she asked, her voice laced with hurt. "I'm not avoiding you," Pedro replied, his tone distant. "I've just been very busy." Fernanda hesitated, her disappointment evident. "Okay. I hope you have a good day." Without waiting for a response, she turned and walked away, her head held high despite the sting of his indifference. Pedro watched her go, a pang of regret twisting in his chest. His coldness wasn't out of apathy, it was self-preservation. He was shielding himself from further disappointment, yet he couldn't shake the guilt that lingered as he watched her disappear into the hotel. Unbeknownst to Pedro, Marcia had been sitting in her car nearby, observing the entire exchange. Her sharp eyes caught every detail, and as Fernanda walked away, Marcia stepped out of her car and marched toward Pedro, her heels clicking on the pavement with purpose. "What's this I see?" Marcia began, her voice dripping with disdain. "What do you have going on with that underling? It's so typical of you to get involved with someone beneath you. You're just like your father, a loser through and through." Pedro's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "Don't speak about anyone like that. You have no respect for others." Marcia's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Respect? I am the owner of this hotel. That means I own the employees. I pay them, and in this world, the one who pays is the one who owns." Pedro turned to face her fully, his voice calm but cutting. "If that's what you believe, then you don't deserve the title of owner." Marcia narrowed her eyes. "And do you think you deserve it?" Pedro shook his head. "Nobody owns people, Marcia. And I don't want to be the owner of anything." Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Always thinking small, just like your father. That's why you'll never be anything. You're nothing, Pedro, and you never will be. And just so you know, I'll do everything in my power to keep you away from what's mine. I've said it before, and I'll say it again, you're nothing to me. Not a brother, not a rival. You're nothing." Pedro's fists clenched at his sides, but he refused to rise to her bait. Marcia pressed on, her tone venomous. "What you're doing here at the hotel, anyone could do it. Inviting designer stores to open locations in a high-end hotel like mine? Please. Of course, they'd want to open a store here. It's not about you, Pedro. It's about the Royal Hotel." Pedro met her gaze, unflinching. Marcia's words were meant to wound, but deep down, they revealed more about her desperation than they did about him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, leaving Marcia seething behind him. "Excuse me, Marcia, I have a lot to do," Pedro said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Without another glance, he walked away, leaving Marcia standing there, her venomous words hanging in the air. As Pedro entered his office, he sat down at his desk and leaned back, letting out a measured breath. His thoughts shifted to the future of the Royal Hotel. The idea of expanding its influence beyond its walls and even beyond the country began to take shape in his mind. With each passing day, Pedro became more engrossed in the possibility of offering Royal Hotels world-class services abroad. He threw himself into extensive research, studying international markets and trends in luxury hospitality. Hours turned into days as Pedro reached out to hotel owners across the globe, presenting the idea of bringing Royal Hotels' prestige and expertise to their properties. His dedication paid off. After weeks of relentless effort, Pedro successfully secured 8 contracts with international hotels. These contracts allowed the Royal Hotel to provide its name and services through outsourced management, receiving a percentage of sales as consultancy fees. Pedro undertook all of this not out of a desire for the presidency but because of his genuine love for the work. The thrill of creating, innovating, and transforming gave him a sense of purpose. With every achievement, Pedro grew more confident, and this newfound empowerment became his anchor, keeping his mind occupied. Yet, even in his busiest moments, his thoughts often drifted to Fernanda. He tried to push those feelings aside, knowing his emotions were fragile. Abandonment was a wound that had never fully healed, and he was reluctant to let anyone get close enough to reopen it. One evening, Pedro returned home to find Selena waiting for him in the living room, her face lit with anticipation. "Hi, Pedro," she greeted him warmly. "I've been looking forward to hearing what you have to say. You sounded so excited on the phone." Pedro smiled, his mother's curiosity drawing out a rare lightness in him. "You're very curious, Miss Selena. Sit down, and let's talk." As she settled into the plush armchair across from him, Pedro began, his tone measured but filled with pride. "Mom, I've been offering our consultancy services to hotels abroad. Out of the 25 hotels I contacted, 15 have signed outsourced management contracts with us. As you know, this means they'll use the Royal Hotel name and service standards, and will receive a percentage of their sales as consultancy fees." Selena's eyes widened, but Pedro continued, "And there's more. The new stores and the party and convention space will open next week. The stores have already started stocking their merchandise, and the furniture for the new event space is being delivered tomorrow." For a moment, Selena was silent, clearly processing everything her son had accomplished. When she finally spoke, her voice was full of wonder. "You can't be serious, Pedro. How did you manage to achieve so much in such a short time? I don't even know what to say. I'm so proud of you." Pedro met her gaze, his expression softening. "I remember it like it was yesterday," she continued, her tone nostalgic. "You told me you had no interest in the hotel. And now, look at the transformation you've made, and you've done it all on your own." Pedro's smile grew faint, a mixture of pride and the lingering weight of the battles he had fought silently. For him, this moment was more than just an achievement, it was a step toward proving something, not just to the world, but to himself. "I learned to love what I do, Mom," Pedro said quietly, his voice carrying a sincerity that made Selena pause. "That's all. I dedicated myself, analyzed what could be done to improve the hotel. I didn't do it for the money, it's the challenge I enjoy. To prove to myself that I'm capable." Before Selena could respond, Marcia entered the room, catching the tail end of the conversation. Her expression shifted into one of calculated curiosity. "What ability are you talking about, Pedro?" she asked. Selena, ever ready to defend her son, replied before Pedro could. "Your brother was explaining how he's proven to himself his ability to manage and improve a business." Marcia laughed, the sound brittle. "Let's not get carried away, Mom. Pedro found an empty space in the hotel and convinced some designer stores to open there. It's a high-end hotel, of course, they'd agree. Anyone could have done it." Pedro didn't respond, but his eyes narrowed slightly as Marcia continued, her tone becoming saccharine. "By the way, I'd like to organize the inauguration for the new building. I want to invite our business partners, the high society crowd. It'll be great publicity." Both Selena and Pedro turned to look at Marcia, their disbelief evident. "Marcia," Selena said, her tone sharp, "your brother has put in all the work to make this happen, and now you want to take the credit by hosting the party. You want to step into the spotlight after everything is already done? I don't think so. Pedro will handle the inauguration as he sees fit." She fixed her gaze on her daughter, her voice growing colder. "If it was so easy, why didn't you do it? You've been working at the Royal Hotel for years, Marcia. What improvements have you made? What vision have you brought to the table? Everything seems easy when someone else has already done the work. But no one thinks about the time, effort, and thought that goes into making it happen. You only see the results, not the struggle behind them." Marcia's face tightened, but she quickly masked her frustration, her mind racing. Then, as though plucking an idea from thin air, she said, "I've been thinking about ways to save money at the hotel. We could start by cutting some of the perks we offer employees. Do we really need to provide snacks, coffee, and water in the cafeteria? Cutting those would save a lot of money every month." She continued, her tone growing more confident. "And what about cutting back on staff? For large events, we could use freelancers instead of maintaining a full staff. We could even introduce self-check-in machines in the lobby, like the ones at airports. Guests could handle their own check-ins. Many hotels are doing this already, and they've managed to cut more than half their expenses annually. We should implement the same system here." Pedro looked at Marcia, his jaw tightening, but before he could respond, Selena's sharp tone cut through the room. "Marcia," she began, her voice steady but full of warning, "are you seriously suggesting degrading the experience of both our guests and our employees in the name of cutting costs?" Pedro's mind churned, but he remained silent, waiting to see how his mother would handle Marcia's sudden and thoughtless proposal. "Marcia," Selena began, her tone sharp with irritation, "what exactly will be the level of service at these events if you replace our dedicated staff with freelancers? Do you think they will uphold the same standards as our employees? What makes the Royal Hotel so desirable is the unparalleled level of service we provide to our customers. That's why people choose us. And machines in the lobby? Who will welcome our guests, machines? Are you incapable of seeing how that would degrade the entire experience?" Selena's voice grew colder, her frustration palpable. "And taking away snacks and basic amenities from our employees, do you think that's right? Do you understand what kind of message that sends about how we value our people? Everything you've proposed would cheapen the hotel's image. It would lower our standards and turn us into just another ordinary establishment. I'm sorry, Marcia, but this is a terrible idea. Marcia bristled, her lips curling into a sneer. Since Pedro arrived, nothing I say matters to you anymore. It's always about him now. He's suddenly the only one with any capacity, isn't he? Good night, Mother. She stormed out of the room, leaving Selena and Pedro to exchange a glance, Selena shaking her head in exasperation. The grand opening of the new stores and the luxurious event space for weddings and conventions was an extraordinary success. The ballroom's schedule quickly filled with weddings, corporate conventions, and exclusive galas. Calls poured in from clients eager to book their events, though many were disappointed to find that securing a date was nearly impossible due to the overwhelming demand. Selena and Pedro could barely contain their pride as they watched the Royal Hotel thrive under the changes they had implemented. The bustling stores, the elegant event space, and the heightened reputation of the hotel were proof of Pedro's vision and hard work. One rainy night, as Pedro was leaving the hotel's garage to head home, his headlights caught a familiar figure walking along the wet sidewalk. It was Fernanda, huddled against the rain without an umbrella, her steps quick and deliberate. Pedro slowed his car and pulled up beside her, lowering the window. "Fernanda," he called out, his voice carrying over the rain, "get in. It's pouring. I'll take you home." Fernanda stopped, startled to see him. "I don't think it's necessary. The bus will be here in a few minutes." "But thank you," she replied, her tone polite but distant. Pedro frowned and opened his car door, stepping out into the downpour. "Then I'll walk with you until it comes." Fernanda's eyes widened in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "Pedro, I already told you I'm taking the bus." Pedro shrugged, rain soaking his shirt. "Why are you so stubborn? Please, Fernanda, get in the car. Let me take you home." With a sigh of resignation, Fernanda relented and climbed into the car. The tension between them was palpable as Pedro started driving, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken words. After a while, Fernanda realized the route wasn't familiar. She glanced at Pedro, her voice cautious. "This isn't the way to my house. Where are you taking me?" Pedro's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly before he answered, "I'm taking you to a restaurant. We need to talk in a quiet place." Fernanda's brow furrowed. "I tried to talk to you before, remember? In the garage. You wouldn't listen." Pedro exhaled deeply, his voice quieter now. "I know. And I owe you an apology for that. I was insensitive. Let me make amends tonight." Fernanda looked at him for a long moment before turning her gaze back to the road, her curiosity mingling with uncertainty as she let herself be taken wherever Pedro was leading. Seated in the quiet intimacy of the restaurant, Pedro's expression was calm, yet his voice carried the weight of unspoken emotions. "Fernanda, I need to apologize for that day in the garage. I was wrong to brush you off so coldly. I'm sorry. But what's been haunting me more than anything is not understanding why you didn't want to see me anymore. And please, don't tell me it's about our difference in social status. That argument means nothing to me, and it shouldn't to you either." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on hers. "It would have been easier if you'd just told me you didn't like me. At least then, I'd know where I stand. It would hurt, but not like this." Fernanda's eyes softened as she met his eyes. There was a vulnerability in his words that touched her deeply. "Of course I liked you, Pedro," she said, her voice low. "That's exactly why I thought it would be better to keep my distance. Our worlds are so different, and I was afraid that, in the end, you'd realize you wanted someone on the same level as you. All that would be left for me was a broken heart." Pedro shook his head, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. "Fernanda, you're deceiving yourself with one lie and comforting yourself with another. Even if you don't believe what you're saying." Fernanda's eyes narrowed slightly. "Did you bring me here to insult me, Pedro?" "Never," he said firmly. "I brought you here to tell you the truth, that I'm falling in love with you. And I need to know if you feel anything for me. Are you willing to give us a chance? To get to know me better before judging me?" Her resolve began to waver as she looked into his eyes, his sincerity cutting through her fears. "Pedro, I'm falling in love with you too. You were right, I've been lying to myself. I was just so afraid of getting hurt again." Pedro leaned in closer. "You still haven't answered my question. I'll ask it again. Will you give me the chance to prove to you who I really am, before you judge me?" She took a breath, her voice soft. "Yes, I will." Relief and something deeper washed over Pedro's face. He gently took her hand in his and kissed it. "That's all I need to hear. Don't worry about anything else, Fernanda. Let's focus on us, on building something together. I promise, I'll always be here for you." Fernanda smiled warmly, her worries melting away under the weight of his words. Pedro moved closer, wrapping her in a gentle hug, the kind that felt like reassurance in its purest form. "Now," he said lightly, breaking the moment with a grin, "let's order something to eat. What would you like? Everything here is fantastic." They shared a light-hearted dinner, the air between them warmer now, filled with laughter and meaningful glances. After their meal, Pedro suggested a walk along the beach promenade, and Fernanda agreed. The beach was quiet, the waves lapping softly against the shore under the dim glow of the streetlights. As they sat on a bench overlooking the water, Pedro turned to Fernanda, his voice gentle. "Fernanda, may I have your permission to kiss you?" His question caught her off guard in the most tender way. Fernanda didn't answer with words. Instead, she closed her eyes, a small smile gracing her lips, and leaned toward him. Pedro closed the distance between them, their first kiss slow and affectionate, filled with the kind of emotion neither of them had dared to express before. They sat together for hours, talking and learning about each other in ways that felt natural, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. When they finally checked the time, they realized it was already 4:30 a.m. Fernanda had to be at work by 7:00 a.m. Pedro insisted on driving her home, and as they arrived at her house, he turned to her, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Fernanda, I will always be by your side. I will always protect you. Whatever you need, don't hesitate for a second, call me, and I'll be there." Fernanda leaned closer to him, placing her hands gently on his face, her eyes shimmering with emotion. She kissed him tenderly, her voice soft as she pulled back. "It feels like I'm dreaming, hearing you say those words." Pedro smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's not a dream, Fernanda. It's us. And it's real." "I'm being very serious, Fernanda," Pedro said softly, his eyes holding hers. "Anything you need, call me. I'll do everything I can to make our relationship work. Now, go in and get some rest. Tomorrow's Friday, and the restaurant will be hectic. After work, shall we have dinner?" Fernanda smiled, warmth radiating from her. "Yes, I'd love that." The following day, Pedro arrived at the Royal Hotel with an energy that hadn't been there in months. His steps were lighter, his smile brighter, and his focus sharper. By lunchtime, his door opened, and Fernanda entered with his food. As soon as their eyes met, Pedro's face lit up with a grin. "Close the door," he said, his voice quiet but playful. Fernanda hesitated, glancing behind her, but she complied, locking the door as Pedro walked over to her. Without a word, he leaned in and gave her a quick kiss. As he pulled back, a mischievous smile played on his lips.